Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago this week, Russia launched an unprovoked invasion on Ukraine. We are entering the fourth year of war in Ukraine and 11 years of war on Ukraine since the invasion in Crimea and the Donbass. In the past few days, this major invasion, that fact has sadly been disputed. But it's important that history represent the truth. Whether it's Putin or anyone else, including in our government, that says Russia is not the aggressor and that Ukraine is responsible for the invasion, they're lying. Yesterday's anniversary reminds us that the Ukrainian people continue to suffer, but I know that they will remain strong and resilient. This is not a regional fight. Ukraine's sovereignty is a U.S. national security issue. We must hold the line in Ukraine now, or we may have American boots on the ground fighting in Europe in a few years. That's my fear. We do want peace, and yet this administration has begun negotiations from the weakest possible position. Before we even get to the table, Ukraine has been excluded from NATO. Territorial concessions were granted to Russia, and Ukraine didn't even have a seat at the table. This is what they get for a sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of their people, cities destroyed across Ukraine. The Trump administration must increase pressure on Russia if we are truly interested in peace. With Russia in particular, weakness invites aggression, and easing up on Russia only makes Ukraine's fight harder. We must stand firm. I spent 25 years in the Army defending America's national security interests at home and abroad. When I retired a little over 2 years ago, I traveled to Ukraine 14 times investigating war crimes. I traveled to Kharkiv, 20 miles from the Russian border. I traveled to Zaporizhia, 20 miles from the Russian front. I traveled to Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, cities that have appeared in the news, devastated by Russian attacks. Those people are resilient. They're fighting for their freedom, much like we fought for our freedom almost 250 years ago. We're going to be celebrating that anniversary in one short year. Can you imagine what it would have been like if France did not intervene on our behalf? You know, we have a portrait there of the Marquis de Lafayette that stood with us shoulder to shoulder. The French spilled blood on our battlefields. We weren't even asked to do that. We were asked to provide some material support, 31 tanks, a couple of hundred of our armor vehicles, and some money. Now, granted, we have to watch how we spend our money. We have an obligation to the American people. But we also have to recognize where our national security interests lie. And the fact that we spent 80 years defending an international order that our grandfathers fought for and died on European battlefields for. I think we've forgotten that for some reason. I can't explain it. But they know that in Ukraine, because that's what they're fighting for. They know that if they give up, the Russians will occupy. And in those occupied areas, they've already deported tens of thousands of children to be re-educated, taken away from their family. They've put the Ukrainian people in camps. Russia is basically like a boa constrictor, slowly digesting chunks of Ukraine. If we pause now without security guarantees, they'll be back at it in a few years, just like they were after Crimea, like they were in Georgia, like they were in Moldova. We have to be clear-eyed about that in our interests. And so in Virginia's 7th District, my voters expect me to stand up for American values, and that's exactly what I'm doing by speaking out today. And that's why I'll keep fighting for strong U.S. leadership all around the world. That includes Ukraine's sovereignty for our own country's national security interests, and for the values that keep and have kept America strong. On this anniversary, we must reaffirm our commitment that we stand against autocrats and dictators like Russia and North Korea, and that we stand with you